Imagine for a second that you are cleaning out a closet.
Oh, the classic weekend chore.
Right, exactly. It is one of those deeply mundane, almost meditative tasks. Maybe it has been, I don't know, 7 years since your grandmother passed away, and you are finally getting around to sorting through the things that got boxed up in a hurry.
Just the stuff tucked away in the back of a wall cabinet and completely forgotten.
Yeah, you are pulling out dusty winter coats, old shoe boxes filled with miscellaneous wires that go to absolutely nothing.
Everyone has that wire box.
We all do. And then you spot it. Sitting there in the gloom is an old, battered, Soviet-era cardboard folder.
Oh, wow.
The really thick, coarse kind of cardboard, the little cloth ribbons that used to tie it securely shut are torn off. You open it up, probably expecting to find a stack of old utility bills or maybe some faded recipes or just mundane administrative paperwork from decades ago.
Sure, just normal household ephemera.
But instead, you find yourself staring at a 309-page, single-spaced, typewritten manuscript.
That is quite the find.
It really is. And as you start reading the fading ink, you realize you haven't just found some quaint piece of family memorabilia. You have stumbled upon the deliberately hidden history of a national hero, a man who was systematically, methodically erased by a totalitarian regime.
Yeah.
And woven through all of this high-stakes political history is a deeply personal, incredibly heartbreaking love story.
It's the ultimate cinematic hook, really, and yet it is entirely real.
Yeah.
That fragile cardboard folder is the foundation of our deep dive today. What we are examining is the life, the meteoric rise, and the tragic fall of Vladimir Petrov.
The chess player.
Exactly. He holds the distinction of being Latvia's very first chess grandmaster. And the source material we are pulling from today is this exact manuscript. It is a sprawling memoir titled A Star Extinguished Before Its Time.
Which is such a powerful title.
It is. Or in the original Russian, Zvezda, Pogashaya do Sroka. It was written in absolute secret by his widow, Galina Petrova Matisa. And then it was later finalized, defended, and brought to light by her grandsons, Vladimir Dedkov and Olga Sorokina.
So the mission for our deep dive today is to guide you through this extraordinary text. We want to unpack how a brilliant, incredibly contradictory genius navigates the glamorous, high-stakes heights of international chess in the 1920s and 30s.
The golden era of the game.
Exactly. And we are going to look at how that relatively insulated world of elite intellect violently collides with the crushing, inescapable weight of 20th century geopolitical turmoil.
It is a massive collision.
It is. But beyond the history of chess, we are going to explore the mechanics of historical memory, the strange, obsessive quirks of elite minds, and really the sheer stubborn devotion required to save someone you love from being entirely forgotten by the world.
That concept of being forgotten is just so central to this entire narrative. This text operates on so many interconnected levels. I mean, it serves as a sports biography, certainly, but it is also a harrowing primary source document about the daily grinding reality of living under totalitarianism. At its core, though, it is a romance. It forces us to confront the reality that history is not just some objective ledger of facts that naturally preserves itself. History is an active battleground.
And I really want you, the listener, to keep that fragility in mind as we go through his life. Think about how easily this story could have just vanished.
Poof, gone.
If not for a widow's stubborn love, her sheer will to sit at a heavy typewriter and hammer out 309 pages of memories when the world was actively telling her to stay silent.
When it was dangerous to speak.
Right. And if not for that forgotten folder surviving in a closet, a Grandmaster's legacy would be gone. A man who sat across the board from the greatest minds of his generation would be nothing but a footnote. Maybe not even that.
The line between being a celebrated national icon and being completely excised from the historical record is terrifyingly thin. And the story of how this book even came to exist in the form we have it today is a saga of betrayal and reclamation in itself.
Let's get into that.
So we have to look at the grandson, Vladimir Dedkov, who is actually named after his grandfather. He finds this manuscript, and he realizes it is the third copy of a collaborative work his grandmother Galina had attempted to put together back in the 1990s.
Okay.
She had worked with a Latvian journalist named Andris Fried. Galina handed over her deeply personal memories, her private photos, her husband's intimate letters, essentially trusting this writer to help her tell the story.
But the collaboration turned into a massive betrayal.
It really did.
The grandsons discovered that a book had actually been published in America in English in 2004, which was after Galina had passed away,
Right.
but it was published under a highly sensationalized title, Vladimir's Petrovs, a chess player's story from greatness to the Gulag. And here's the kicker. It was published solely under Andras Fried's name. Galina's co-authorship was entirely stripped away.
She was marginalized in her own life story. The deeply personal lyrical memories, the texture of their relationship, the emotional soul of the narrative, all of that was severely minimized.
So gutted.
Exactly. She was relegated to a brief mention as the grieving widow. The text was hollowed out into a relatively dry academic history of Latvian chess, interspersed with tournament tables and game analyses.
It is infuriating when you think about it. Galina had meticulously documented in her notes that her memories were pure, personal, and full of emotion. She explicitly wrote down the exact title she wanted, A Star Extinguished Before Its Time, and she wanted it dedicated to the memory of her husband.
Yeah.
Instead, an opportunistic journalist essentially hijacked her trauma and her life's work. When the grandsons realized this, they knew they had to right this wrong.
They had a duty.
They completely abandoned any idea of just publishing another dry chess analysis and focused entirely on restoring their grandmother's voice, her exact unedited manuscript.
It perfectly illustrates how reclaiming history is so often a messy, multi-generational battle. I mean, Galina fought the first incredibly dangerous battle, the battle against the state's forced forgetting.
Which was a literal matter of life and death.
Exactly. She typed out the memories, when doing so, could have still invited serious state scrutiny. And then, decades later, the grandsons had to fight the second battle, the battle for authorship and proper context. They had to ensure their grandmother was not written out of her own love story by someone looking to capitalize on the Grandmaster's name.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to dig into that first battle you mentioned, the state's forced forgetting, because that is the core trauma haunting this family. The manuscript outlines how, until his posthumous rehabilitation in March 1989, Vladimir Petrov's name was completely taboo in the USSR and in Soviet-occupied Latvia.
Completely forbidden.
He was officially designated an enemy of the people. For decades, it was literally dangerous to speak his name aloud in public. But what I don't quite get is, why was chess so dangerous?
It is a great question.
I understand purging political rivals or military generals, but why systematically erase a guy whose entire life was just moving wooden pieces on a board?
It comes down to what chess represented, particularly to the Soviet state. We really have to look at the concept of damnatio memoria.
The Latin phrase.
Right, the condemnation of memory. In ancient Rome, if an emperor was disgraced, they would chisel his face off statues and scratch his name out of the public record.
Oh, wow.
The totalitarian regimes of the 20th century perfected this practice on an industrial scale. For the Soviet Union, chess was not just a parlor game. It was heavily state-sponsored and deeply weaponized as a propaganda tool.
So as a proxy for the Cold War, basically.
Exactly. It was meant to be the ultimate, undeniable proof of Soviet intellectual and ideological superiority over the West. Therefore, the grandmasters were state assets.
Yes.
If a prominent Latvian grandmaster, someone representing a newly annexed territory, was deemed insufficiently loyal, or too cosmopolitan, or resistant to Soviet ideology, he could not just be imprisoned. His past achievements contradicted the narrative that only perfect Soviet citizens achieve greatness.
Because if a bad guy is smart, the state narrative falls apart.
Precisely. Totalitarianism requires an absolute monopoly on truth. Any narrative, even a sports record, that contradicts the state's chosen reality must be excised completely. His games were not analyzed in Soviet chess magazines, his achievements for Latvia were ignored, and his name simply vanished.
And that macro-level political erasure seeped into the family's daily life in this incredibly insidious psychological way. The grandson, Vladimir, writes about how, during the Soviet era, the adults in the family never spoke about his grandfather in front of the kids.
Man.
It was a locked-door secret. But kids are sponges, right? They hear things. He remembers being a young boy at a rare adult dinner party, hovering in the hallway, eavesdropping, and he hears an adult whisper that his grandfather had rotted in the dungeons. The Russian phrase was "simile vizestenka."
That phrase alone carries so much weight. Imagine the psychological impact on a child. He hears this terrifying, highly evocative phrase. He does not even fully comprehend what the dungeons mean in a modern political
He
context.
just knows it's bad.
Right. He can hear the fear in the adult's voice, and he instinctively knows it is a dangerous secret.
It is staggering to think about raising a family under that kind of psychological pressure. The family had to hide absolutely everything related to Petrov. They kept a few tiny relics. There were two silver tournament cups, a beautifully crafted chess box inlaid with Baltic amber, and a berzipfel.
The watch fob.
Right, a traditional leather watch fob from his university fraternity. But after young Vladimir was caught playing with the amber chess box one afternoon, the adults panicked. They gathered all the relics and hid them away completely. He didn't even get to properly look at that fraternity watch fob until after his grandmother died. The fear was that deeply ingrained.
When you understand that context, Galina's manuscript becomes all the more miraculous. She was holding on to these vibrant, beautiful memories in a society that aggressively demanded she forget them. So when we pivot to the actual life of Vladimir Petrov, we have to constantly remember the profound silence that was meant to swallow it.
So let's look at the man himself. Because if you were to picture the origins of a grandmaster, you would probably imagine a child prodigy born with a pawn in his hand, quietly studying classical games in a dusty, dimly lit library.
The classic stereotype.
Yeah. The moment he fully committed to chess happened when he was 15 in 1924. He decides to enter a side tournament at the first Latvian Chess Congress. He completely steamrolls the competition, winning 100% of his games.
Undefeated.
He takes home a massive prize of 100 lats, which was an astronomical sum of money for a working-class schoolboy back then. But the money was not the most important part. The great Latvian master Hermanis Madisons was there, and Madisons personally handed him the prize.
Which is a huge deal.
Right. Madison's was apparently notoriously stingy with compliments, a very harsh critic, but he praised one of Petrov's endgames in front of everyone and made a prophecy. He said this kid had a great future if he was willing to put in the grueling work.
That kind of validation from an established master is often the psychological tipping point for a prodigy. It shifts their self-perception from talented amateur to future professional. Within 3 years, chess completely consumed his life. And there is this darkly funny, visceral quote the manuscript provides from young Petrov.
Oh, I love this quote.
When he was playing a match and had his opponent trapped on the ropes, often before the opponent even realized they were caught in a mating net, Petrov would lean in and say, "How pleasantly the corpse of the enemy smells."
It is so dramatic, very theatrical for a teenager.
Very.
But it highlights this dual nature he had, because while he was this ruthless, calculating predator on the chessboard, his real life off the board was wonderfully chaotic and messy. For example, he enrolled in the law faculty at the University of Latvia in 1925, and it took him, get this, 15 years to finally graduate.
He was the classic eternal student. But the context provided by the memoir is important to understand here. It was not laziness or lack of intellect. It was a combination of his intense, globe-trotting chess commitments, severe financial struggles, and unexpected health issues.
He had a lot going on.
He had to take a job working at the railway administration, earning a meager 70 to 80 lats a month just to survive and fund his chess travel. He had to complete a year of mandatory military service. And, shockingly, for someone so athletic, he suffered from severe bouts of tuberculosis, which was a very common and dangerous illness at the time, requiring long medical leaves in sanatoriums.
Galina actually writes about how she used to scold him for dragging out his degree for 15 years. She was a very diligent student who crammed for days for her exams, while he would just breeze into the lecture hall, take the test, and pass without opening a book.
Which must have been so annoying for her.
Oh, totally. Which brings us to the sheer, terrifying processing power of his mind. The man had a phenomenal photographic memory. Galina tells this amazing story about her studying for a university history exam on ancient Egypt. She is stressing out, struggling to memorize all these endless, complicated dynasties of pharaohs.
A nightmare exam.
Right. Petrov walks in, reads over her notes a few times, and suddenly he is pacing the room, reciting the names, the exact dates, the centuries, completely effortlessly, like from a cornucopia.
It is a classic trait of elite chess players. They have hyper-developed pattern recognition and extraordinary data retention.
Petrov would literally have to take a magnifying glass to read the letters she sent him, laughing at what he called her chicken scratch.
They are such opposites.
But that incredibly calm, calligraphic exterior on the board hid a very calculated, almost ruthless inner drive when it came to his career. We have to talk about the Machiavellian bargain he struck with his primary rival, Friesis Epsinix.
This is a remarkable piece of sports politics, and it requires a bit of context about how chess Olympiads work. Apsiniks was the longtime captain of the Latvian team and held the title of the second Latvian master. In these international Olympiads, teams of 4 players face off. The strongest player is placed on board 1, facing the opposing country's strongest player.
Makes sense.
In the early days of these tournaments, the team captain had the unilateral power to assign the board order right before the matches began. In the 1930 Hamburg Olympiad, Apsiniks made 2 massive, unforgivable blunders in Petrovs' eyes. First, as captain, he completely miscalculated the team's travel funds.
Oh, boy.
This resulted in the entire Latvia national chess team having to spend their last night in Germany sleeping on hard wooden park benches in a public square because they couldn't afford a hotel room.
Just imagine these elite chess minds representing their country, waking up on park benches, stiff, freezing, and exhausted.
It was incredibly humiliating. But the second, far more significant offense was that Apsiniks used his captain's privilege to assign himself to board 1 for the highly anticipated match against France. This meant Apsiniks got the rare honor of playing against the reigning world champion Alexander Alekhine.
And Alekhine was Petrov's hero.
Exactly. Petrov, whose idol was Alekhine, was desperate to play him. He felt completely robbed of the opportunity by a captain abusing his power, and he publicly and fiercely criticized Apsiniks for it when they returned to Riga.
The bad blood between them was very real. Petrov stewed over this perceived theft for 3 years. He knew he was the better player, and he wanted to be on board 1, representing Latvia against the absolute titans of the game. So we get to 1933. There is a tie for the first ever Latvian championship title between Petrov and Apsiniks.
A showdown.
A total showdown. They're supposed to play a high-stakes tiebreaker match to decide who is the ultimate champion of the country. But Petrov makes this cold, incredibly calculated move. He calls the press and announces he refuses to play the tiebreaker. Instead, he orchestrates a backroom compromise. He intentionally, voluntarily forfeits the national championship title to Apsiniks.
Let's give it to him.
He hands his bitter rival the prize money, the local glory, and the title of champion. But in exchange, he extracts an ironclad, permanent guarantee that he, Petrov, will play board 1 for Latvia at all future official international events.
It is a profound insight into the ego and ambition of a grandmaster. He sacrificed local vanity, the immediate, tangible gratification of being crowned the national champion for international exposure.
He played the long game.
He understood a fundamental truth about legacy. To be considered the best in the world, he had to play the best in the world. Dominating local Latvian tournaments or playing on board 2 or 3 internationally would never get him the matches against the Alekhines and the Capablancas of the era. He traded a localized, temporary ego boost for global historical opportunity. It is an incredibly shrewd display of long-term strategic thinking applied to real life.
He gave up a battle to win the war. And his gamble worked perfectly. He went on to play board 1 at all subsequent pre-war Olympiads, cementing his international reputation. But while he was this cold, calculating machine when it came to his career, his personal life was, well, it was a completely different story. Their romance is straight out of a 1920s film.
It really provides a wonderful, humanizing contrast to the stoic chess player. They actually met in Hamburg, the same city where he would later sleep on the park bench. Galina was visiting her uncle, who happened to be the Latvian consul there.
That is a fun coincidence.
Galina was a philology student studying languages and a prominent member of the Sororitas Tatiana University sorority.
Yep.
Her memoir describes her very first impression of Petrov at a social gathering. He was cheerful, incredibly easy to talk to, and possessed this brilliant, wide smile. She actually admits in the text that she was deeply envious of his beautiful white teeth.
That is so funny.
She initially thought he smiled so much on purpose just to show them off to the girls.
He was clearly a charmer. He had to travel back to Latvia before she did, but he immediately started sending her letters. And years later, he confessed to her what he called his biggest attack.
I love this story.
He intentionally organized a chess simultaneous exhibition in her specific hometown of Ruzicne. Now, for those who do not follow chess closely, a simultaneous exhibition, or a simul, is an event where a master walks around a large room playing dozens of opponents at the exact same time, making one move per board. It is a huge spectacle.
Very exhausting to pull off.
Very. And Petrov did not care at all about the chess games in Ruzicne. He literally just set up this massive, exhausting event as a convenient excuse to travel to her town, go to her house, and meet her parents to, in his words, cast his fishing line. He later told her, "You forgot I am a chess player. Every step was calculated. My biggest attack was the attack on you."
It is an incredibly romantic gesture, but it also shows that tactical, multi-step mindset bleeding over into his courtship.
Uh-huh.
However, the memoir makes it very clear that they were fundamentally different people, which led to a significant amount of friction.
Oh, definitely.
Galena paints a picture of herself as a very vibrant, sociable, carefree young woman. She loved dancing, she loved ice skating at the city rinks, she was the Magister Cantendi, the singing leader of her sorority, known among her peers as the singer-dancer. She loved fashion, and she particularly loved wearing high heels.
And here we get to Petrov's deep-seated insecurities. He was a broad-shouldered, strong, athletic guy, but he was noticeably short. And he was incredibly insecure about his height. Galena writes that when he sat down at a table, he looked like a large, imposing man, but the moment he stood up, the illusion was broken.
Yeah, that bothered him a lot.
He actually begged her repeatedly and seriously to stop wearing her beloved high heels whenever they were out together because it made him feel physically inadequate next to her. On top of that insecurity, he was fiercely jealous and highly superstitious.
The inclusion of these details makes the source material so fantastic. Galena does not shy away from their fights or try to paint a sanitized, perfect picture of their courtship. It humanizes these historical figures through charming, sometimes petty domestic details. It forces us to see Petrov not just as a stoic marble bust of a grandmaster, but as a sensitive, proud, highly emotional young man in his 20s trying to navigate a relationship. As a chess master, he was used to being singular, the sole master of the board, the center of attention. Being lumped in as just another suitor among many in a humorous poem struck directly at his core insecurity of being unremarkable.
He had to be special.
Exactly. Yet, despite all these volatile clashes of personality, Galena notes that they loved each other deeply. She reflects back on these moments as an older woman writing the memoir and tenderly admits she didn't fully understand his romantic, highly contradictory nature at the time.
Which brings us to the zenith of his career. It is 1937, and we are at the massive international chess tournament in Kemeri, which is a beautiful resort town in Latvia. This was one of the strongest tournaments in the world at the time. Petrov is playing, but he has just been drafted into the Latvian army for a short, mandatory stint.
Bad timing.
Very. So he arrives at this glamorous resort looking like a raw recruit, wearing a uniform with a completely shaved head. He is miserable and self-conscious about his hair, writing desperate letters begging Galena to come quickly and comfort him. Now, Galena admits very freely that she knew absolutely nothing about chess.
Nothing at all.
She did not read the sports magazines, she did not know the rankings or the names, so she walks into the lobby of this tournament completely blind to the fact that she's casually mingling with the absolute, undisputed titans of 20th century chess.
And that outsider perspective is exactly what makes her memoir so incredibly valuable to chess historians. She's not describing their opening repertoires or their brilliant endgames. She's describing their humanity, their neuroses, and often the underlying political anxieties that were starting to crack their composure. Take Paul Kears, for example.
Estonian player.
Yes, the great Estonian chess genius, one of the strongest players never to become world champion.
Galena literally finds him hiding in the woods. She goes for a walk in the massive sprawling park behind the resort hotel and spots Kira's secretary frantically running around looking for him. She wanders deeper into the trees and finds Kira sitting completely alone on a secluded bench, actively hiding from his own entourage and the press.
Just needing a break from it all.
She promises not to out him, and they just sit and talk. And Kira is so visibly relieved when he realizes she knows absolutely nothing about chess and does not want to talk about the Karakan defense. He actually asks her why on earth she chose to marry a chess player if she does not care about the game.
That is a great detail.
They end up having this wonderful, normal conversation about university life and his fears of never graduating because of his endless tournament travels. It is such a quiet, humanizing moment for a chess legend.
And Keres, it should be noted for context, was a man of deep integrity. He was one of the very few people from that world who stood by Galena later, who truly mourned Petrov and openly believed in his innocence when the Soviet state later branded him a criminal. But contrasting with Keres' quiet humility, we have Galena's encounter with Alexander Alekhine, the reigning world champion and Petrov's absolute idol.
Petrov worshipped the ground Alekhine walked on. When Petrov was 17, he read a newspaper report that Alekhine had played 28 games blindfolded simultaneously in Paris, and it completely blew his mind. But Galena, she was terrified of the man.
He was intimidating.
She found him rude, arrogant, and extremely distant. And Alekhine's wife, Grace, was even worse. There is this scene in the memoir where Galena, who is pregnant at the time, climbs onto a windowsill in her hotel room to try and fix a stuck curtain. Alekine's wife walks past, sees her, and starts viciously scolding her like a disobedient child, loudly lecturing her on being reckless with her pregnancy. Galena was so deeply offended by the condescension.
Beyond the interpersonal friction, there is a profound, dark tragedy to Alekine revealed in this text. During the tournament, someone asked Alekine if he ever wanted to return to Russia. He emphatically, angrily said, never, claiming his only memories of his homeland were of hunger, poverty, and ruin during the revolution. More tragically, he claimed he had absolutely no relative left living there.
But that was not true.
No. Galena notes that she completely believed him at the time, but learned years later with horror that he was lying. He had a brother and his sister still living in the USSR. He lied to his colleagues to protect his siblings because the Soviet state had previously forced them to officially denounce him in the press as a bourgeois, anti-Soviet émigré. If he acknowledged them, he put targets on their backs.
It is heartbreaking. The vicious politics of the era were poisoning every human interaction. And nowhere is this creeping dread clearer than in Galena's close friendship with Reza Flor. Reza was the elegant, glamorous wife of the famous Czechoslovakian Grandmaster Salo Flor. Reza was a former Moscow actress, always beautifully dressed, giving Galena sophisticated makeup tips and drawing beautiful wedding dress designs for her.
They bonded immediately.
They were completely inseparable during the Khmer tournament.
It brilliantly illustrates the creeping, invisible atmosphere of political terror beginning to enter this glamorous, international, seemingly isolated world of elite chess. The players thought they were above the fray, protected by their intellect. But that tension violently explodes later when the Petrovs travel to visit the Flors in Prague.
Right. It is a few years later. They are in Prague, having what seems to be a lovely evening. They're all sitting in the Flors' beautifully furnished, luxurious apartment. Galena, still relatively naive to the political realities of the East, innocently asks Salo Flor why he does not want to move back to Moscow, since Reza is always constantly praising the city and talking about how wonderful and prosperous life is in the Soviet Union.
And that question changes everything.
The warm mood in the room instantly, completely shatters.
Salo Flor, who is usually described as this amiable, smiling, easygoing man, sharply and aggressively interrupts his wife. He speaks with intense fear and barely suppressed anger. He completely contradicts Reza's rosy, propaganda-infused picture of Moscow. He tells Galena that in the USSR you have to be terrified of every single word you speak aloud.
He lays it all out.
He says everything is wiretapped. Everyone is a potential informant, even your friends. You have to assume you are constantly being watched, especially if you have foreign connections or travel abroad for tournaments. Reza tries to argue with him, looking deeply embarrassed that he's exposing this fear to foreigners, but Salo forcefully shuts her down.
Galena was completely stunned. She had inadvertently triggered this massive, terrifying domestic dispute. But it shows the immense, crushing psychological pressure these elite players were under, trying to navigate a totalitarian state while maintaining an international career. Before things get too undeniably dark, though, we have to mention the famous lucky accident with the Flors back in Camry, because it is just too funny to skip.
Yes, the infamous incident with the Finnish player, Book.
It is pure slapstick comedy in the middle of this intense tournament. Galena has the Flors and Book over for a visit in her hotel room. Galena's baby daughter, Marina, is fussy and crying. Burke, being this very typical, stoic, unflappable northerner, calmly offers some parenting advice and confidently sits the fussy baby on his lap to bounce her.
A brave man.
Very brave. Galena steps out of the room for just a second to get something, and when she comes back, she realizes, to her absolute horror, that the baby has completely wet herself all over Book's immaculate, perfectly tailored, light gray trousers.
And Salo Flor's reaction to this disaster is what makes the scene legendary in chess circles.
Salo completely loses his mind. He is laughing uncontrollably, tears streaming down his face. Galena is mortified, blushing, apologizing profusely, while Burke just sits there completely flushed, frozen, and deeply embarrassed. Petrov walks in, sees the mess, and is absolutely furious at Galena for being careless and embarrassing a distinguished guest.
But Salo saves the day.
He does. Salo, still crying with laughter, stands up and declares that getting peed on by a baby is a well-known sign of immense good luck in Russian superstition. He confidently guarantees Burke that because of this, he will absolutely win his incredibly tough match the next day. And sure enough, Burke had to awkwardly rush his ruined pants to the dry cleaner, but the next afternoon he played brilliantly and won his game.
It is a wonderful, much-needed moment of levity. It also highlights the deep, almost irrational superstitions inherent in high-level competitive sports. Petrov had his talismans and his routines. Salo had his dog, and apparently ruined trousers could be interpreted as a divine omen of victory. But unfortunately, that levity is extremely short-lived.
Yeah, things change fast.
The tone of the memoir shifts dramatically, almost like a thriller descending into a horror story as we enter the final act. Dark omens and the G-Lag.
The shadow that falls over the Petrov family is just unimaginably dark. Galina's writing changes here. It becomes heavier, filled with grief. She writes about a string of horrific family tragedies that feel almost biblical in their relentless accumulation.
And Galina notes that amidst all of this, Petrov seemed to have a deep, unsettling, almost supernatural sense of doom about his own life. His favorite song was a melancholy Russian romance called Shine, Shine, My Star. The lyrics include the line, "If I die, you shine over my grave."
Very ominous.
He sang it constantly. He played it on the piano for her. He even wrote the lyrics in neat calligraphy on the very first page of his chest notebook. She admits she did not understand why a young, vibrant, successful man was so obsessed with a song about death at the time.
He also had two eerie prophecies given to him that seemed to haunt him. A famous, highly sought-after clairvoyant in Riga named Fink read his fortune and told him that he carried a photograph of a woman and child in his breast pocket. Which was true. He carried a picture of Galina and Marina. Fink then warned him that if he ever went on a long journey, he would leave that woman and child and never, ever return to them.
Fink was only off by a few months in his timeline.
And then later, on a ship traveling across the ocean to a major tournament in Argentina, a Japanese astrologer looked at his astrological charts and gave him a chilling warning. Your star has risen very brightly, but it will burn out quickly. Petrov nervously joked about it, but he only wanted to believe the first half of that sentence.
To understand how those prophecies manifested, we must address the historical facts of his downfall, strictly as they are documented in the records Galina eventually obtained. To understand how quickly the ground shifted under the Petrov family, we have to look at the broader map of 1939 and 1940. You have the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, which essentially contains secret protocols carving up Eastern Europe into spheres of influence.
And Latvia is caught in the middle.
As a direct result, in 1940, the Soviet Union annexed Latvia. Overnight, Petrov's homeland ceased to be an independent nation and became a Soviet republic, and the massive apparatus of the Soviet state quickly, ruthlessly turned its eye on its newly acquired cultural figures. A Soviet chess magazine, Saz, launched a vicious, highly coordinated smear campaign against Petrov.
The magazine published a hit piece labeling him a white guard emigre. Now, what does that specific phrase actually signal in the context of 1940s Soviet rhetoric? Because Galina points out it was a complete, easily disprovable fabrication. He was born in Riga to a shoemaker. He was not a Russian aristocrat fleeing the revolution.
That label, white guard emigre, was effectively a death sentence. In Soviet political terminology, the whites were the anti-communist forces during the Russian Civil War. By labeling him an emigre sympathetic to the whites, the magazine was officially signaling to the secret police that Petrov was an ideological enemy of the state. The truth did not matter.
The narrative is what mattered.
They also accused him of bourgeois arrogance, of lacking socialist responsibility, and claimed his scandalous behavior involving drinking and gambling for money was completely out of control. It was a character assassination designed to strip him of his public support.
His childhood friend, Sergei Kartsev, was so outraged by these blatant lies that he wrote a passionate rebuttal to the magazine defending Petrov's character. The editors actually sent Kartsev a private, unofficial apology letter admitting that their information was false, but they flatly refused to publish a public retraction. The narrative had been set, the damage was done.
That smear campaign was simply the ideological groundwork for his physical removal from society. According to the KGB records Galina fought for decades to finally uncover, Vladimir Petrov was arrested in Moscow in August 1942. The official charge was Article 58, anti-Soviet agitation and propaganda.
The catch-all charge.
This was the charge used during the purges to eliminate anyone deemed undesirable. He was sentenced to 10 years in the corrective labor camps, the Gulag. He did not survive. The records state he died of pneumonia in Kotlas in August 1943 at the age of 35, in the absolute prime of his physical and creative life.
And Galina was left behind in absolute, terrifying darkness. She did not know he was dead for years. She kept hoping, kept waiting for a letter. And this is where the heartbreak with Raisa Flor comes back with devastating cruelty.
It is a terrible betrayal.
The Flors had eventually moved to the USSR to escape the advancing Nazis. Galina, desperate and terrified, wrote pleading letters to Raisa, begging her for any information about Vladimir. She hoped her elegant, glamorous, well-connected friend would help her, maybe invite her to Moscow or pull some strings with the chess establishment. She received absolute chilling silence.
Not a single reply.
Raisa never answered a single letter. Galina writes in her memoir how naive I was. I believed so much in friendship then.
It is a profound betrayal, but also a stark indicator of the terror Raisa herself must have been living under. Associating with the wife of a convicted enemy of the people could have meant arrest for the floors as well. So what does this entire narrative mean for you, the listener, sitting here decades later? It demonstrates with brutal clarity how totalitarian systems operate.
They break everything.
They do not merely destroy the physical person in a freezing labor camp. They attempt to fundamentally rewrite their identity. They take a brilliant, complex national hero, a man who sacrificed his own championship title to represent his country on the world stage, and they fabricate a villain. They erase his games from the record books, they silence his name, and they isolate his grieving widow by terrifying her closest friends into total submission.
It is a heavy, heavy reality to process. But we need to bring this deep dive full circle. Vladimir Petrov was a man of immense talent and deep, fascinating contradictions. He was a football striker who challenged his friend to 100 grueling games of chess just to prove he could adapt.
He was a university student who took 15 years to get a law degree, but could memorize Egyptian pharaohs in a heartbeat.
He was a deeply insecure romantic who bought out all the charity balloons at a ball to show off, and a ruthless, brilliant competitor who manipulated national titles for international glory. He lived a vibrant, messy, brilliant life that was cut brutally short by the grinding machinery of the 20th century.
His legacy was almost entirely successfully erased by the state. And that near erasure leads to a profound realization of the nature of the history we consume every day. We assume history is solid, but it is incredibly porous.
Exactly. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about the sheer volume of lost history. We only know Vladimir Petrov's true story. We only know about the 100-game duel, the freezing park benches in Hamburg, the petty fight over the ice rink, and the dog named Terry, who was almost named Beria because Galina Petrovna-Matisa relentlessly typed out 309 pages of memories.
She fought to keep him alive on paper.
She typed them when no one would publish them, when it was still dangerous to hold them, and she hid them in a closet. And we only know it today because her grandsons randomly found that cardboard folder 7 years after she died and fought to protect her authorship.
How many other brilliant stars burned out in the 20th century whose loved ones did not survive the wars to write their stories? How many incredible manuscripts were burned in stoves to avoid the secret police, or lost in the rubble, or never written at all because the fear was simply too great to overcome?
How much of what we confidently call history is actually just the tiny, miraculous fraction of documents that managed to accidentally survive the fire? Think about that the next time you clean out a closet. You never know what ghosts are waiting in the dark to finally be heard.
Lena notes in the memoir that Paul Kires, the young man she had found hiding in the woods years earlier, was one of the very few players who ever dared to express sympathy and remember Petrov fondly in the decades that followed.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring it back to the title of the memoir itself, A Star Extinguished Before Its Time. That title actually comes from Petrov's favorite romance song, Shine, Shine, My Star.
Galina writes that the title is her ultimate plea. It is a plea for his star to continue shining over his unknown, unmarked gulag grave.
It stands as a testament to the fact that a regime can execute a man, they can ban his name from publications, they can write articles destroying his professional reputation, but they cannot easily erase the stubborn love of a spouse.
It took decades. Petrov wasn't officially rehabilitated by the state until 1989. It took a grandson finding a battered cardboard box to finally restore the true face of a grandmaster.
I want you to really consider the power of preserving a legacy. The fragile thread of our history sometimes literally hangs on a few typed pages tied with ribbon in a forgotten closet.
It leaves you with something profound to mull over. Think about the footprints we leave behind today. We generate endless digital trails, social media profiles, and massive amounts of data.
Right.
But if someone were to find a cardboard folder summarizing your life 70 years from now, what would it actually say? Would it just be a dry, curated list of your professional accolades and resume bullet points? Or would it capture the quirky, deeply human details, like arguing over high heels, stubbornly whipping out a university logic gradebook, or trading away a championship title just to face the greatest challenge possible?
Because in the end, those are the details that truly define who we were.